Here are the directions for the pollination simulator game. The first thing you need to do is divide equal amounts of pollinators and flowers to the players. Make sure you read the cards. The pollinators need to know what kind of flowers they like, and the flowers need to make sure that they color their flowers properly. Make sure you color the pollinators too. Once you have those, you're going to hand out colored tokens to each one of the flowers. Make sure they have at least 10 to 20 tokens and that the tokens are different colors per flower. We don't want to mix up colors of tokens because we're going to use these to simulate the pollen being transferred between the flowers. Once you're there, it's time to go outside or in the gym or your classroom. The first thing you need to do is you need to disperse the flowers like in a real field. Once the players with the flowers are dispersed, it's time to set a timer. It's up to you how long you want to play the game, but usually about 6 minutes should work well. Once the timers start, then it's time for the pollinators to go to the right flowers. In this example, we'll just be using a bee. So once we say go, the bee is going to visit a flower. The person holding the flower is going to give that bee one token, which represents one piece of pollen. Once they get that pollen, they hang on to that until they run over and find the next flower. They're going to give that token to the flower person and they're going to hang on to that color. Don't hand that color back out because that's going to represent the pollination that's been transferred. The bee will get a new color from that designated flower. And then the bee continues to visit different types of flower. They deposit one token, one piece of pollen, and then they pick up another piece of pollen for that bee. And then they just continue this cycle until there's a time every 2 minutes or so, the teacher is going to call out beehive. The beehive simply represents a time when a bee has to go back to the hive to distribute the pollen and nectar that it's collected. When they do this, the bee must immediately, and only the bees, not the other pollinators, must run back to the hive to deposit that token. They lose that token, but as soon as they do, then they're more than welcome to go back out and start pollinating. Now, one of the things that might arise when you're playing this simulator is that the right pollinator has to go to the right flower. If you don't go to the right flower, you can't collect pollen. So for instance, if you were a hummingbird, that means that you can't go to the sunflower because it doesn't have long tubes for you to float on, or it doesn't have a nesting space. So you have to make sure you go to the right flower to collect that pollen. So pollinators might have to travel with their cards, or for something harder, you have to memorize what flowers you like the best. Flowers, you may have to deny certain pollinators who don't belong at your flower to collect pollen. The simulation ends when the timer runs out. What you need to do now is you need to collect all the pollen that was not your original color. This represents all the pollen that was brought to you by those pollinators, the bees, the hummingbirds who visited your flowers and deposited other flowers' pollen. What you want to do now is collect all of those, bring them to the class, and then you're going to use this chart where you're going to record the amount of pollen or tokens that your flower collected over the simulation. That represents how many times visitors came to your flower to help you with pollination.